Hello everyone, this is part 15 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, stood behind the Fire Lord, clad in the ceremonial red and white robes of his position. His hands clasped behind him, he waited, flanked by 2 members of the Jonin Guard and 2 members of the 12 Guardians. The latter hovered around the Fire Lord, trusting nobody with the safety of the Fire Lord other than themselves. They were standing in a small alcove, just behind the booth that would overlook the arena of the Regal Flame. The large Colosseum saw a variety of events, from traveling circuses and musical shows to shinobi competitions such as the Chunin exams. Hiruzen could hear the laughter and shouts of the crowd as they waited for the Chunin exams to begin, and he smiled wryly. There was no doubting that Namikaze Minato had truly been a prodigy in the shinobi arts, but the very concept of the Chunin exams had been genius, even for him. 30 exams later, and it was a practice that had truly established itself throughout the world and one that had brought the shinobi and civilian populations closer together. That boy had always been idealistic, and although war had tempered much of the idealism into pragmatism, Jiraiya's influence had run strong through him. It was such a shame that Konoha and the world would never see Minato pursue his dream. It would have either saved of the world or have destroyed it completely. A tapping noise filled the air as somebody tested the microphone. Hiruzen turned his head to the entrance to the booth. So, it was beginning. He had prepared Naruto for his role by producing a script. All the boy had to do was follow it, and... Yo! Hiruzen shook his head and sighed at the drawled introduction. How lackluster. Nonetheless, the noise of the crowd died down, and the Hokage knew that soon the lords of the great countries would be called out, along with their cage trotting after them like trained pets. It was a symbolic gesture and little more a way for the feudal lords feel better by showing the crowd who's the boss. 100 years ago, that would have been true, but now, in the age of the great villages, it was perhaps not nearly as accurate as the feudal lords would have liked. Nonetheless, Hiruzen would take the intentional slight with good humor. After all, the current Fire Lord was nowhere near as bad as his father had been, especially towards the end of his reign. 10 years in his reign has also showed him the importance of having a good, strong hidden village. Not like the Wind Lord. That affair was entirely disgraceful, and worse, politically volatile. To have a feudal lord boycott his own hidden village, that was just trouble waiting to happen. Tsunagaku was too big a power to continue to put up with that type of treatment forever. No, something would have to be done. Perhaps, after the exams, he would invite the 4th Kazekage for a cup of tea and a good, long talk. Lastly, from the Land of Fire, escorted by Sarutobi Hiruzen, the 3rd Hokage of the village hidden in leaves, we have Lord Shirasagi, the White Heron of the royal court residing in the Land of Fire. Ah, it was time. The Fire Lord stopped his quiet conversation with one of his aides and drew himself up. Then, fan waving idly in one hand, he stepped out past the curtain and onto the booth. Hiruzen followed after him as a symbolic guard, even as the real guards followed after them. Then, as Lord Shirasagi sat down, Hiruzen turned and made his way to the set of seats on the other side of the booth where the rest of the cage sat. He took the chair at the end and sunk into it. Next to him, the 3rd Jinchuriki was scowling as he sat down. The seat was entirely too big for the diminutive cage. Hiruzen smiled and clicked his fingers. A second later, a messenger appeared, kneeling before him. Ignoring the tensing of the cage's guard, Hiruzen knelt down and whispered something in the messenger's ear. Then he sat back as the messenger disappeared. A moment later, the messenger reappeared, and he carried a pile of cushions with him. The 3rd Jinchuriki's scowl faded and he turned his head, eyeing the Hokage with narrowed eyes. Once upon a time, Onoki would have taken that as a grave insult. It would have been a slight that the fence-sitter would not have forgotten, and there would have been retribution. It may have come a day, a week, months or years later, but it would have come. But the 3rd Jinchuriki was an old man. He merely grumbled about his bad hip and gestured for his guards. They checked the cushions, ensuring they were not trapped, and then stacked them on the seat. Onoki sat down on them and, now sitting at the same height as Hiruzen, gave the Hokage a slight nod. Oh, how the times had changed, Hiruzen reflected rather fondly. For the third Hokage to be seated next to the third Chuchikage, his greatest enemy and the man he could quite say he had once hated the most, it was extraordinary. Onoki and Hiruzen had always had a rather tumultuous relationship. Both had ascended to seat of Kage during the First Great Shinobi War. The second Chuchikage had gone down fighting, taking with him the second Mizukage, and the second Hokage had been caught in an ambush, sacrificing himself to save his squad, a squad that had included Hiruzen, and also taking with him the second Reikage. Onoki and Hiruzen had met in the Second Great War. That had been bitter rivals, legends in their own right. The lethal dust techniques of the Chuchikage had killed countless Leaf Nin, entire squadrons, and Sarutobi truly did not know how many men and women who wore the Iwa headband he himself had killed. They were the pillars of the old world, those who remembered the times before the hidden villages had come into existence. They were the longest-serving Kage. They were legends. They were men who seen war and battle, blood and death, pain and fire, and had come out of it stronger and harder. But time was the best teacher, and had a way of putting out the smoldering flames of hatred, Hiruzen reflected. He withdrew his pipe, igniting the end with a delicate use of chakra, and puffed on it. These days, it was far too hard to ignore the similarities that between them. They were two sides of the same coin, fighting to protect the one thing that they loved the most. His chakra capacity must be large to sustain such a technique, the fourth Kazekage spoke up. He was hidden behind his veil, his eyes narrowed as they focused on the young, blonde boy. What an interesting young man. Hiruzen refocused his eyes, noting that Naruto had created his shadow clones to sustain the fire techniques he was using in the arena. His lips twitched, and he said nothing. Onoki snorted. So that's your dog, then? He asked gruffly, but with no hostility. He watched Naruto for a few more moments and nodded. You've raised him well. Hiruzen knew that the Chuchikage meant no insult, but he felt a pang of regret. Yes, Naruto truly was his dog, well-trained and obedient, willing to follow orders and do whatever he was told. Compared to the truly horrible things he had done for Konoha, however, Naruto was only a small pebble that weighed down his shoulders. The crowd below laughed and cheered as the Iwa Nin and Kumo Nin began to battle, reveling in the sight of the shinobi arts put on display. Your genin performed that earth technique well, Hiruzen complimented. He blew a smoke ring, throwing a glance at Onoki from the corner of his eye. And he's quite fast. Onoki grunted and scratched at his bulbous nose. He's a way to go yet, he said gruffly. The talent seems to grow less every generation. The young'uns have become soft, not like we were. Ah, well, perhaps it's better that way, Hiruzen said with a sigh. He smiled somewhat bitterly. We who remember the first shinobi war should never want such an era to return. Onoki grunted again, and made no comment. Next to him, the fourth Reikage watched the proceedings with a bored expression on his face. He rested a mighty arm on the armrest, his head propped up by his hand as he watched his genin hurl spear after spear at the Iwa Nin. Sarutobi had never met this man before, but he knew Namikaze Minato had had encounters with him during the Third Shinobi War, and Konoha's Department of Intelligence had drawn up a character profile. It did not bode well for Konoha. The fourth Reikage was a shrewd man concerned with the image of his village. He cared for power and status. The militarization of Kumo under his reign had caused considerable tension amongst the great villages. Kumo fielded an army larger than any single village, and they were aggressive in their policies. It worried Hiruzen. The third Hokage was sure that it worried Onoki too. Both men were old enough to have seen the consequence of men such as are in charge of armies. What? Roared out as the Kumo genin was blindsided from behind. He clenched his fists and brought him down on the armrest of his chair. The chair groaned, cracks appearing on the surface, but paid no attention. That idiot. Always watch your back. Well played, Chuchikage, the fourth Kazekage murmured from behind his veil. Only his eyes were visible, a few strands of red hair peeking down from behind his turban. Your genin has skill. I would approve of his nomination. Hiruzen murmured his assent as well. Onoki scoffed, but he looked pleased as he rubbed his hands together. The Reikage just grumbled something under his breath, shaking his head. Naruto called out the winner, his young voice booming out from the speakers. Hiruzen's face twitched into a smile as he saw the blonde make a hand seal, and Onoki peered forward as the roaring flames around the arena floor were extinguished. Oh, the third Chuchikage grunted. Was that it wasn't it? He cast a knowing glance at Hiruzen. You've certainly been busy, haven't you? I recognize that particular technique. You were quite the pain with it, if I recall correctly. The Kazekage and Reikage had not immediately made the connection between the technique and the Hokage, which was understandable. Hiruzen had rarely taken to the battlefield during the era of warfare those two had been part, and when he had, there had been other, more visible and potent techniques that would have most definitely been recorded. My thanks for your compliment, old friend, Hiruzen responded. The Chuchikage snorted. Old friend, he says, he muttered. All those times we attempted to kill each other. Ah, I apologize, Hiruzen answered. He raised an eyebrow. Shall I refer to you as a toad-faced, dumpy fool instead? Onoki snorted in amusement. You decrepit, murderous scum, he replied with no real anger. The third Chuchikage let out a deep breath. Those were the times, that second great war of ours. Hiruzen felt a ghost of a smile cross his face. They had been interesting times. Iwa's advance through the bordering countries towards Konoha had been countered by a series of guerrilla attacks. Squads of highly trained, elite shinobi had thwarted Iwa's first division on 4 occasions, prompting the third Chuchikage to take the field himself, crippling Konoha's resistance. Hiruzen had met Onoki on the coast near Takagakure, and a terrible battle had raged. The third Hokage had countered many of Onoki's earth techniques with his own. He had withdrawn the Titan to deal with a level 4 summon, and then gone toe-to-toe against Onoki as the Chuchikage used his dust elemental techniques with devastating effect. The landscape had changed. Large chunks of mountains were torn apart. Entire tracts of forests had disappeared. Plains had been flooded, and an entire island was sunk beneath the ocean. In the end, the god of shinobi had forced the Chuchikage off the field with a devastating blow from his personal summon, Enma, and had led the remainder of Konoha's Anbu in completely routing the remainder of Iwa's first division. It had been this climactic battle that had seen Iwa's 4th division advance into the Land of Rain, only to be met by Konoha's 2nd division, led by his students. Then the last pillar of the old world had become personally involved, and that entire mess had been a slaughter for all 3 sides. Only the shinobi who would become known as the Sannin survived. 2,000 other shinobi were left to rot on the plains of sorrow, their bones still where they fell. Oh yes, they had been the times. As terrible as they had been, it had been an age of war, one that had seen the rise and fall of many great warriors. They had learned from the bloodbath that had been the first shinobi war. Combat on a large scale had evolved. Doctrine had been set. Tactics revised. It had been a testing ground to see which shinobi village had learned the most from the previous war, and in the end, that village had been Konoha. The 4th Kazekage cleared his throat, breaking Hiruzen out of his thoughts, and gestured down at the arena. Is that your grandson? He inquired politely. It is, Hiruzen said with a touch of pride. He watched his foolish young grandson walk onto the field, hardly the most intimidating sight. I must admit, I am eager to see how Konohamaru stands up against your progeny, Kazekage Dono. Kankuro is skilled, the Kazekage warned. There was a hint of warmth as he stared down at his oldest son. His skill in puppetry will soon be greater than that of any shinobi in the world. Unless Sasori of the Bloody Sand comes back, the 4th Reikage cut in. The Kazekage straightened his shoulders at the remark, eyeing the dark-skinned man with a coolness that had not been there before. Understandable. Sasori had been an S-rank shinobi before the 3rd Shinobi War, granted the rank at a young age for his legendary abilities in the art of puppetry. Nobody knew why he had abandoned his village, although the fact that it had coincided with the disappearance of the 3rd Kazekage had not gone unnoticed. As a missing nin, he had single-handedly been responsible for the death of an entire platoon of Konoha's Anbu, a squad that had been tasked with the assassination of his grandmother, and an act that had earned him the moniker, the Bloody Sands. Then he had disappeared, and nobody had seen him since. Hiruzen watched as Konohamaru evaded Kankuro's blows, although he saw how the older boy had already replaced himself with his puppet, using a very clever illusion to trick Konohamaru into thinking that he was still fighting the real him. He puffed on his pipe, even as his fingers momentarily tightened around his armrest as Konohamaru was lured towards the puppet, only escaping death via an accident. He was always tripping over that scarf of his. It was with pride, and the loose of a chuckle that had built up, that he watched Konohamaru use his head literally to smash his way through the puppet, slamming into Kankuro and ending the match in a victory. That was an interesting strategy, the 4th Kazekage said after a few moments. He sounded quite bewildered, actually. I suppose I should scold Kankuro for not expecting the unexpected, but that was truly a tactic that not even I saw coming. Onoki was openly chortling. The boy has a head as hard as his grandfather. The Chuchikage laughed. Amateurish tactics are criticized. However, there was a sharp look in his eyes. Yet the boy showed some talent. He's good on his feet, moves quickly, and he has those summoning skills and elemental techniques under his belt. He eyed the Hokage. Hey, he might turn out to be just as infamous as his grandfather. Time will tell, Hiruzen murmured. He did not appreciate A's apparent interest in his grandson. He slid the hat lower on his head, and puffed on his pipe. Uchiha Sasuke's fight against the Iwanin was over before it had truly begun. Onoki was shaking his head in disgust as the howling winds blew out around the arena. For a girl who had planned to use smoke bombs to negate the Sharingan, it was truly a bad terrain to fight in. That was the point, however, and even Onoki could see that. The rest of the fights went quickly. Hiruzen had to suppress a smile as Hyuga Neji brutally destroyed his opponent, the Kumo Nin never standing a chance against a Hyuga with a chip on his shoulder. For a clan of shinobi who prided themselves on their emotional control, Hiruzen had never met a group of people who could hold a grudge like the Hyuga clan could. When the last male of childbearing age of the Senju clan was assassinated during the Second Great War, it had been the Hyuga who had reaped a bloodied vengeance against Kiri. For a time, it seemed as if the clan had left Konoha and the compound stood mostly empty. The Hyuga had returned, however, dirty, bloodied and grim, and carrying the heads of three of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, including the assassin himself. He seems rather angry, Onoki observed. He shot a glance at A smirk that looked more like a grimace on his face. I wouldn't want to be a Kumo Nin when there's a member of the Hyuga clan in front of me. A scoffed, waving it off with one big, muscled hand. He had been the one responsible for the abduction attempt on Hyuga Hinata, and he had been the one who had pressed for the body of Hyuga Hyashi. Hiruzen took a deep breath and, as he eyed the fourth Raikage, sudden clarity struck him, something he had always known just made so obviously apparent. There would be a war. Perhaps not tomorrow, but Kumo and Konoha, at some point, would clash. Hiruzen truly hoped it was after he died. Let it be another Hokage's problem. Then, if all went to plan, did he truly want to lay that burden at Naruto's feet? The third Hokage let that thought settle down for another time, and he focused back on the Chunin exams. The shinobi from the new village hidden in sound performed adequately, and Hiruzen noted the strange contraption on the boy's arm. What an interesting device, to allow a genin access to powerful wind chakra. Well, that was something that could be useful. He made a mental note to make an attempt to acquire that technology at some point in the future. The last match with Gara of the Sand, however, proved to be most interesting. The fourth Kazekage watched indifferently as his son toyed with his opponent for a few moments, and then grasped him. Hiruzen also watched as Gara destroyed the Taki Nin's arm. Naruto shouted something, but Gara ignored him and went to kill his opponent. The fourth Kazekage sighed and shook his head. Lightning struck. Thunder boomed. The stadium shuddered. Hiruzen felt his lips twitch as he watched Naruto strike at Gara with powerful bolts of searing lightning-natured chakra, forcing the boy back while at the same time saving the Taki Nin. Words were exchanged. Naruto looked especially grim, and Hiruzen made up his mind even as the other Kage watched the spectacle below. Yes, Naruto would have to fight Gara. Naruto took a sip of the water bottle, and then placed it down. He wiped his sweaty brow, breathing heavily. The work as the proctor was exhausting, that many elemental techniques were draining, even for him. It wasn't necessarily chakra consumption, for he had plenty of that. Rather, it was just tiring. Nonetheless, he could continue going, which was good, he decided as he looked up at a clock, because the exams were due to start again in 2 minutes. He stood up from his chair in the small resting area. Well, it was time to get back to work. A few minutes later, Uzumaki Naruto was walking back into the center of the arena. The crowd above and around him had mostly returned to their seats, but there was still quite a bit of movement, and the noise was almost deafening. Nonetheless, the moment Naruto had appeared, it had begun to quieten down as thousands of pairs of eyes tracked him as he moved forward. The young, blonde Anbu pulled out the microphone and switched it on. The second round of the Chunin exams will begin, he said loudly, his voice blaring from the speakers. So, Neji of Konoha and Kohe of Iwa make their way to the arena. You have 2 minutes. Both genin were there in seconds. Hyuga Neji looked passive, his blank, white eyes staring unnervingly at Kohe. For his part, Kohe leered at the Hyuga. The Iwanin towered over the boy, in height and in bulk, and his squinty eyes carried a cunning glint. Naruto watched on, a polite smile on his face. The Iwanin definitely had a strategy here. Neji would have to be careful. The spinner was spun, and it landed on Earth. Naruto held in a wince, even as his shadow clones created a terrain full of boulders and sharpened spikes of rock. This was the terrain that an Iwanin favored, where many of their earth techniques could be used. Neji would be at an elemental disadvantage here, although his Byakugan should theoretically prevent Kohe from using the rocks as cover or in an ambush. "Genin, fight!" Naruto called. The crowd roared as Neji darted at Kohe, closing the distance in a blink of an eye. It was an impressive burst of speed from a Genin, and Kohe's eyes widened as Neji lunged at him, his hand held up to deliver a debilitating touch. The Hyuga was not pulling any moves this round. Recognizing that he was at a disadvantage, Neji was going in for the kill as soon as possible. Kohe took staggered step backwards, and the fingertips that had been aimed at his forehead missed. Nonetheless, they grazed over his nose and the Iwanin yelped in a surprisingly high-pitched voice. Bleeding from the face, Kohe seemed helpless as Neji spun around his flailing fist, coming around for another set of powerful strikes, and then, Neji abruptly jumped back. A second later, a series of explosions detonated around the Iwanin, explosives tags going off. Naruto was surprised. He had seen the Iwanin prime the tags the moment the match had started, but he hadn't thought the boy would have used them when he was in such close proximity. It had been a risky strategy, however, it had worked, and Neji was now far away that the slightly scorched, bleeding Iwanin could use his technique. Kohe sped through a series of hand seals, but they were different from last time, and Naruto saw twice as many seals. The ground underneath him liquefied and Kohe sank down into the mud. He disappeared under the ground, and Neji focused his gaze upon the dirt. He was frowning, and knowing that he lacked anything in his arsenal to force Kohe out, the Hyuga jumped up on top of a nearby boulder. His white, billowing clothes blew in a faint wind as silence filled the arena. Kohe had not appeared yet, and did not appear in the next few minutes. The crowd was beginning to get restless. What had once been a tense build-up of atmosphere was evaporating into boredom. Somebody called out for them to hurry up, and he was joined by dozens of other cries. Neji ignored them, as did Naruto. He stood on top of the tallest pillar, watching carefully. There, in the ground, Naruto saw a tremor, and then another. A crack appeared and dirt exploded outwards as something forced its way out. Neji moved in a flash, hurling a series of kunai at the ground, explosive tags sizzling at the ends. They detonated and it was a strong blast, too. They had been at least grade 3 tags, equipment usually beyond the reach of a genin. Dust and dirt billowed out, and smoke filled the air in a haze. Neji wasn't affected, but Naruto was, and he resisted the urge to blow it all away with a blast of wind. Then, in the middle of all of that dust and smoke, he heard a thud and then another one, and another one. They were footsteps, he realized, and as the smoke cleared, Naruto was suitably impressed with Kohe's technique. While his last one had created a set of rocky gauntlets, this one had created a full suit of armor, and Kohe was decked from head to toe in slabs of thick, tough stone. The boy was stooped over a little, and Naruto could hear some panting. The technique had clearly been draining, but in the end it had succeeded. What followed was a battle between power and speed. Neji ran circles around Kohe, who moved like a lumbering giant in his armor. The Iwanin could not strike at Neji without the boy dodging, yet so far Neji's blows had not penetrated the armor of rock at all. Then, Neji took a stance, charged at Kohe, and began blitzing him with a series of fast, chakra-infused blows. The air rocked and rippled as Neji hit him once, then twice, then 4 times, then 8 times and so on until at the very end, the rock began to crumble. What happened next was unexpected. As Neji went in for the last blow, the armor of rock cracked and splintered, but suddenly a row of sharpened spikes shot out of the chest area. Neji's hand came down upon it, the Hyuga realizing too late exactly what had happened, and he impaled himself. He immediately pulled back, darting backwards to nurse his wounded hand, but Kohe raised his arms, and the rock surrounding his hands exploded outwards with the force of an exploding tag. Neji spun around on the spot, blood trailing after him, creating a huge dome of spiraling chakra, but as he finished, Kohe lunged with far greater speed than he had before and struck the Hyuga in the face. Neji was punted backwards, slamming into the ground and rolling over. Kohe chuckled, the laughter echoing through the armor of rock as Neji rose. Hands bleeding, his eye swelling up, Neji surveyed his opponent with cool disinterest. Proctor, he called. Naruto turned to look at him. I surrender, Neji called. He didn't look upset over his loss, merely resigned. I cannot penetrate that suit of armor with my level of Yukin, and I lack the tools necessarily to overcome that limit. The match goes to the Iwa Nin. Naruto shrugged. Neji of Konoha forfeits, he spoke into the microphone. Winner, Kohe of Iwa. Kohe allowed the rocks to fall away from him. The boy looked tired, but victorious, and he approached Neji with what seemed like a sneer on his face. His beady, little eyes looked down on the Hyuga and then he stuck out his hand. Good match, Leaf Nin, he rumbled. Neji looked at the hand blankly. Then, he raised his uninjured hand and took it. They shook hands, Leaf Nin and Iwa Nin, surrounded by thousands of people. Naruto watched on, smiling wryly. How unexpected. Perhaps he was distracted. Perhaps he truly didn't sense them. For whatever reason, Naruto was suddenly aware that he was not alone in the arena. He turned his head sharply, a scowl coming across his features as two men and a woman ran out into the arena through one of the side entrances. Who let you in? Naruto asked, frowning. This arena is for genin only. Neji and Kohe turned as Naruto flickered, coming down to stand in front of them. I have a message for all of Konoha, the lead man shouted. He had sandy blonde hair, and rather sad eyes. His mouth was set in a grim line. It was the same for his compatriots as well. The woman held her shoulders back, openly proud, while the third man hunched down under the looks. The crowd watched, some beginning to boo, as the man turned to face the Kage's booth. Naruto clicked his fingers, signaling the guards. This is my message, he shouted. There can only be one king. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Seconds had passed, and none of the guards had appeared. Something wasn't right. From the Kage's booth, Naruto saw Sarutobi rise. Nostrils flaring, the blonde Anbu raced at the man, even as he turned. The movement sent his cloak flaring out around him, revealing the circles of grade 5 explosive tags circling his chest. Each one was sizzling, seconds away from detonation. Naruto's eyes darted over his two companions, and they too wore bulky cloaks. That many explosive tags would cover the entire arena. For a split second, the man with the sandy blonde hair met Naruto's eyes, and Naruto saw that the man knew of his fate and was prepared to die. He acted. His charge came to a halt, and he jumped backwards in a flicker of movement, even as the civilians opened their arms to the crowd. Naruto appeared before the two genin, a hand on each of their arms, and he spun around, picking him up and hurling him away. An instant later, the shadow clones that surrounded the arena acted, moving through the barrier to catch the genin, throwing them backwards at the holes the barrier squads had opened, away from the danger. There was a flash of movement as Naruto spun around, a kunai appearing in his hand. The lead man had appeared in front of him, moving as fast as any shinobi, his eyes dangerously cold. Die, you puppet, he whispered fiercely. Then, the tags stopped sizzling. Naruto met the man's eyes as fire sprung out from all around him, closing in on him with no hope of escape. In the Kage's booth, Sarutobi Hiruzen watched as Kohe weathered the attacks of the Hyuga boy and forced the Prodigy into resigning. Next to him, Onoki leaned forward as he watched on, a touch of smugness on his face. Hiruzen harumphed, and puffed on his pipe, drawing comfort from the tobacco. Very well, he conceded, as if it had been his intention all along. You may have that round. Your genin is quite skilled, I'll give you that. He has researched his opponents well. Kohe is a rising prodigy, Onoki replied. He settled back into the lush cushions underneath him, looking satisfied. He will rise to become a great master of earth techniques. There have been many skilled shinobi presented today, the fourth Kazekage murmured. The potential is there. The fourth Reikage said nothing. Now that his genin were out of the exams, the man looked utterly bored. He sat there, chin rested upon arm, watching, and no doubt making a mental note of everything he saw. Hiruzen eyed her from the corner of his eye. Hey, what's this, Sarutobi? Onoki asked. Is that part of your great show? Hiruzen turned his eyes back to the field. A group of people had just emerged from underneath the arena, and even at that distance the third Hokage could tell that none of them wore the uniform or headband of a Leaf Nin. What was this, then? I don't know, Hiruzen murmured. He felt the chakra within him begin to stir as his instincts began to stir. Something wasn't right here. I have a message for all of Konoha, one of the intruders screamed out to the audience. The Hokage saw Naruto summon the Jonin guard, the shinobi who should have been guarding the entrance to the arenas, and his eyes narrowed as he saw that none answered the call. One of the intruders turned to face the Kage's box, and Hiruzen stared down at the man who so brazenly stared back, no trace of fear on his face. There can only be one king. The man roared. For a split second, Hiruzen froze. His eyes darted to the left, where the Fire Lord had stopped fanning himself. The noble looked truly stunned, and he turned his head to look at the Hokage. Shirasagi's eyes met those of Hiruzen, and an unspoken message was passed between them. The third Hokage rose up from his seat, ignoring the Kage that sat around him, and he moved to the edge of the balcony. Naruto was charging at the man, the intent to take him down clear. Suddenly though, Naruto halted his advance and retreated. The blonde Anbu picked each of the genin up even as the intruder who had spoken moved forward with the speed and grace of a shinobi. Then, Naruto threw each of the genin clear, turning back just as the man was upon him. A devastating explosion rocked the arena. The booth shuddered, and the audience screamed and ducked as fires tore apart the arena in seconds. Dozens of explosive tags must have gone off, Hiruzen concluded, not even moving an inch as he watched the storm of fire from above. The barrier squads shouted to each other and held back the force of the explosion, the barrier glowing with a deep blue shimmer. The spikes and pillars of earth that had set the stage for the previous fight were blasted apart in an instant underneath the force of the explosion, and the earth was torn to shreds. Perhaps an entire reel had been primed, Hiruzen thought in the back of his mind, but the rest of him was utterly focused on below, and he was barely aware that each of the Kage had come to join him. His hands had tightened against the guard rail as the fire began to dissipate, smoke billowing up into the air, rising through the barriers. Blackened and charred earth was revealed, a pockmarked and desolate surface appearing before them all. No ordinary shinobi could have survived that. Even a good shinobi would have perished. But Naruto was not just a good shinobi. Where was he? He felt it first, a rising, foul blaze of unholy chakra from the middle of the diminishing flames. Yellow and orange flames died down, disappearing, as a dark crimson light emerged from the smoke. The chakra was potent and strong, clearly recognizable to all of the shinobi that had been present in Konoha 12 years ago. As the smoke died away, Hiruzen stared down at Uzumaki Naruto. Crimson-slitted eyes stared back. The boy was surrounded by a miasma of light, bubbling, oozing chakra that covered his entire form. His whiskers had deepened, with his teeth sharp and his fingers curled into claws. A lone tail swished behind him, and even at that distance, the Hokage could see blasted and burnt patches of skin knitting back together, repairing itself. Naruto stood there for a few moments, breathing deeply as the regenerative properties of the nine-tailed demon fox restored his body back to good order. His clothes were in tatters, and some of his hair was missing, but even that was beginning to grow back. There was dead silence in the arena. The citizens and audience members stared down at the glowing visage before them. Some whispered. Some drew back. The shinobi in the audience muttered to each other. A word was being repeated all around, a word that the third Chuchikage said quietly to himself. Jinchuriki. Naruto let the power course through him, repairing his battered, burnt body. It had been a close thing, he reflected, even as he battled against the negative feelings that dwelled within him. The sound of rattling chains was ever present in his ears, but he ignored them. What a dangerous situation that had been. For an explosion that great, there must have been at least 40 explosive tags grade 5, and they hadn't been those bulk-ordered tags from the manufactorium too. No, these had been handmade. You could always tell. Naruto smiled grimly, feeling his sharpened teeth bite into his lip. With practiced ease, he cut off the connection between him and the power of the nine-tailed demon fox and let the bubbling crimson miasma dissipate from around him. His clothes were in tatters, he realized wryly, but he pressed his hand against his Anbu tattoo and summoned his armor. It would have to do. Then, he turned and faced the Hokage, who watched him from the edge of the booth. The audience murmured and spoke to each other with hushed whispers. Now what? He didn't have to wait long. The figure on the booth snapped his fingers and somebody appeared in a blur. A few moments later, a messenger appeared before him, holding 2 bits of paper. Naruto took them both and read them. The first one was simple: continue on with the exams. The second was not so simple, and must have been written before this incident. Naruto blew out the air from his cheeks as he channeled a spark of fire to his hands and turned both bits of paper into ashes. Then, the messenger was back, and he held a microphone in his hand. Naruto took it, turning it on and tapping it. Testing, testing, Naruto mumbled. He winced at the high-pitched squeal. Testing. Okay, it's working. Ladies and gentlemen, Konoha apologizes for the, here he stumbled, delay. I think we're good to go. Barrier squads. There came an affirmative. Right. Well, I'm clearly not dead, so I guess we'll just go on. Naruto turned and looked at the ground. He made a few hand seals, and the earth groaned as he churned itself over. Scorched and blank ground disappeared beneath the surface as newly tumbled earth replaced it. Konohamaru of Konoha and Gara of Suna, you're up. It was back to business. The Chunin exams continued. The crowd was restless, and the murmurings continued, but they were mostly covered up by the cheers and shouts as Gara and Konohamaru appeared. The latter still wore the adamantium helmet, the transformed monkey that he had summoned the last fight. The former appeared the same. However, he watched Naruto with slightly widened eyes, his hands trembling. Naruto remembered the first letter and eyed Gara grimly. Konohamaru, Naruto said quietly as the Sarutobi approached the field. His voice was out of reach for anybody apart from those two. If Gara puts you in his sand, surrender. Don't waste time trying to get out of it. Understand? I'm not going to give up, Konohamaru protested, clenching his fists, scowling. Idiot, Naruto hissed under his breath. You saw the Taki Nin, right? He leaned in a little as Konohamaru sobered. I barely got to him in time. Don't die, you brat. Then, Naruto moved away. The wheel was spun, and great gouts of fire and pillars of earth rose from the ground. The shadow clones around them formed hand seals and held them, sustaining the terrain, while the real Naruto took a spot on the tallest pillar of earth, watching the match intently. He would have to move quickly if no, when Konohamaru lost this. The boy was good for his age, but he wasn't good enough to take on a Jinchuriki. The fight began and Konohamaru was clearly struggling from the get-go. The young boy was countered at every move but a swirl of sand, blocking every kunai and shuriken, and smothering the explosive tags before they had even detonated. The young Sarutobi had clearly chosen to keep his distance, to keep out of reach of Gara's sand, and stayed on his pillar of earth. Gara also did not move, content to keep blocking, occasionally sending out a shuriken of sand that Konohamaru blocked or dodged. A few minutes into the match saw Konohamaru down to his last few weapons, and it was clear from the boy's clenched hands and biting lips that he didn't really have another plan. However, as Konohamaru slowed down, Gara stepped up the pace. The red-haired boy raised his hand, and the fallen sand from his fallen sand shurikens rose up. It had scattered all around Konohamaru, but now it moved around him, binding his arms and legs and covering his mouth. Konohamaru spluttered and gasped against the binding of sand, helpless, even as Gara sent a whole stream of it from his gourd across the fiery arena. Naruto had seen enough. He appeared before Konohamaru, his face grim. This match is decided, he called out loudly. Konohamaru of Konoha is unable to continue. Winner, Gara of the Sand. There weren't very many cheers this time. Thousands of people leaned forward, watching to see if the unstable boy would continue to attack regardless of the verdict. They were not disappointed. The sand continued on, unabated, and Naruto turned to face it. He made a few lightning-quick hand seals, his chakra flaring up within his tired, sore and aching body. Then, he gathered wind elemental chakra in his hands. Wind release, great wind breakthrough. The resulting gust of roaring wind sent the incoming sand scattering, blown back, buffeted by the strong gales. Naruto shook his head grimly as he turned back to Konohamaru, who was whimpering as the sand began to squeeze around him. He made a few hand seals, and lightning chakra blazed on the palm of his hand. With quick, deft movements, he cut through the bindings of sand, which hissed and sizzled underneath the heat. Konohamaru fell, and almost immediately one of Naruto's shadow clones appeared. He picked Konohamaru up and disappeared, just as a giant wave of sand crashed into where the boy had been a moment ago. The real Naruto had jumped back, ever instinct on edge, and he watched on coolly as Gara rose from the giant mound of sand, his eyes bulging. She will not be denied a second time, he whispered rather erratically. The bloodlust he was radiating was potent and strong. His bulging eyes, trembling limbs and menacing grin painted a rather unstable picture. For a genin, he was undoubtedly powerful, and combined with his power, and his instability, he had even been put in a few of the bingo books as an A rank. It was with a grim smile that Naruto decided that he would see if Gara had earned that. This is my arena, Naruto began, folding his arms and looking upon the unstable Jinchuriki stonily. And that's twice you've ignored me. Gara of the sand, your disc. If you keep getting in a way, then mother will have to feast upon your blood. Gara snarled. Mother. Naruto's eyebrow rose. Then again, that might be helpful, especially given the contents of the second letter. He strode towards Gara, who stiffened and began to raise his arms. The sand around him trembled, rising up, blocking Naruto from view of the crowds. It was then that Naruto spoke. Gara, Naruto began. Your mother is a whore, and a bitch, and she never loved you. Gaara's eyes bulged. If it were possible, the bloodlust around him thickened. He was shuddering as he swept his arms in a rather grand gesture, pointing at Naruto. The mound of sand that he was standing on rumbled, and it was with a giant roar that it shot towards Naruto. The audience yelled, some sounding confused, many calling upon Naruto and Gara to beat the shit out of the other. As the sand surrounding him from all sides, cutting off any opportunity to escape, Naruto reflected that one way or another, they were about to see it. Then, he was surrounded. The sand crushed him, trapping him, pouring into every crevice of his body until it was too much, and the chakra construct promptly dispersed into a puff of smoke. Rasengan. The real Naruto appeared from underneath Gara, and as the boy whirled around, eyes wide, Naruto delivered the A-rank technique right into his chest. Sand was grinded away, his armor useless against the powerful technique, but Naruto stopped it short of killing the Sunanin, and merely used it to blow him backwards. He was sent spiraling away, towards the pits of flames, but his sand raced out to catch him. Fire release. Great Dragon Fire Technique. From the rising pillars of flame came a dragon head-shaped ball of fire. The sheer heat of the technique would have been felt by those sitting in the top booth had the barrier not been shielding them, and Naruto skillfully manipulated the technique to turn. It opened its mouth and roared the sound of 1,000 explosions, and then it shot forward in a flash. Gaara's sand came out to block it, and block it did, but for a few moments, the fire looked as if it were going to eat through the flames, which had begun to blacken. Then, Gara screamed and the ground cracked. From the crevices came more sand, broken and crushed rock that Gara used to reinforce his barrier. Summoning technique, arise, Titan. As Gara finished blocking the flames, hands out and visibly panting, the earth around him shuddered. From the ground came a giant fist of gleaming rock, which swung down to strike at him. Gara disappeared in a haze of sound, an instant before the giant fist struck the ground where he had been standing. He reappeared but had to disappear as a second arose from the ground, moving to swat him. Each hand looked like it could have belonged on a Class 5 summon. Stop! Stop it! Gara shrieked. I want, she wants. He was incoherent. The chakra around him boiled and wreathed, a sickly yellow-golden color, and Naruto shuddered as the first trace of the tailed beast's chakra began to be felt. Naruto stood back, patiently waiting as the sand surrounded Gara, enveloping him and changing him. One of his arms grew in length, a giant claw of sand, the paw of the one-tailed demon raccoon. Then, the sand crept over his face, layering over his skin, crawling into his eye socket, altering and building upon what was already there. It was a startling change, Naruto realized. Was that he had come off to everybody. He shrugged to himself, and reached into his vest. It had gone on long enough. His objective had been fulfilled. Gara had used the chakra of the tailed beast. All he had to do now. Gara, half boy, half something, roared, and the sound sent the hairs on the back of his neck rising. The air was thick with foul chakra and inhuman killing intent. Naruto was breathing deeply, but remained unaffected and alert. It was powerful and potent, yes, but nothing compared to the last 6 months. He darted forward, utilizing his speed, and before Gara could react, Naruto was upon him. The blonde Anbu dodged one swing of the claw, and then another, spinning around and delivering a giant slap to the thing's head. Gara froze, and then the sand around him began to crumble to the ground. The yellow tag on his head glowed, the faded seal on it becoming as fresh as it would have been had it been written yesterday. Naruto didn't know where Sarutobi had gotten the seal from. The man had not written it himself. The chakra in the seal, while powerful, was decidedly feminine, but it worked wonder. In less than 10 seconds, Gara, cut off from the chakra of his tailed demon, sank to his knees, looking lost. Where is she? He muttered to himself. Mission details: force an encounter with Gara. Overwhelm him. Show that Konoha's Jinchuriki is better than Suna's. Mission accomplished. Naruto sighed, shaking his head wearily. The fight had been just the last in a series of adrenaline-surging events, and he truly couldn't wait until the day was over. As the audience began to clap or boo respectively, Gara looked up at him with shaking hands. Why did you stop me? Naruto considered that. Because it was my job, he answered after a few moments. And, because as much as that brat pisses me off, he's a comrade. He leaned down, his eyes dark. And you don't fuck with my comrades. Comrades. Gara whispered. He sounded lonely. That sounds nice. It is, Naruto answered after a beat. He was staring at Gara now, and seeing the lost expression the boy wore brought the sounds of rattling chains to his ears. Was this what he would have been like had the Hokage not dragged him into his life? A life where his only comrade was the mighty beast within him. Do you want comrades? Naruto asked him, scratching his head. Gara jerked at that. They'll betray me, he murmured. They always do. It probably doesn't help that you keep trying to kill people, Naruto interjected. Besides, I don't know much about you and your family, but that girl from your team, what's her name? Temari. Gara asked, confused. Well, she's trying to beat the shit out of one of my clones right up there. Naruto pointed, and Gara followed his finger. Then, as Naruto knelt down to pick up the compliant redhead, he continued. She threatened to do something nasty to my, junk, if I killed you. That doesn't sound like something a betrayer would say, does it? Gara considered that. Whatever, Naruto sighed, as he heaved the boy over his shoulder. Members of the Kazekage's guard were coming onto the field. It's not my problem, and I'm not your counselor. He handed Gara over to the grim-faced Suna Nin. Oi, Gara. Naruto called as the boy was carried away. Gara craned his head to stare back at him. Remember what I said, if you touch my comrades, I'll kill you. Gara hesitated, and then nodded. Naruto turned around, reached for his microphone and switched it on. Gara of the Sand is disqualified from the Chunin exams because he didn't do what he was told, he said bluntly. Konohamaru surrendered, so he's out too. We're on to the final match. Sasuke of Konoha, come out and meet your opponent, Kohe of Iwa. With all that had happened, the final match was rather anticlimactic. Uchiha Sasuke, with his Sharingan spinning, allowed Kohe to don his armor of thick, lumbering stone. Then, jumping up on one of the stone pillars, he held out his hand and summoned a blade of pure lightning. Kohe didn't stand a chance as Sasuke plunged the deadly technique into the boy's armor, shattering it instantly and covering his hand in blood as he pierced into Kohe's shoulder. The Iwa Nin was out in an instant, and the audience cheered and yelled as Sasuke stood above him. Naruto appeared next to him and took his arm. The winner of the 30th International Chunin exams is Uchiha Sasuke, of the village hidden in leaves. Naruto yelled, lifting Sasuke's arm up. The crowd stomped and chanted. Sasuke stood there, his shoulders squared, Sharingan spinning and an unmistakable look of pride on his face. Naruto clapped him on the shoulder. Well done, the blonde Anbu said quietly, barely audible over the din. Remember what I said a while ago? Sasuke turned, a faint puzzled look on his face. Then, his eyes widened and darted to look at Naruto's shoulder, where his Anbu tattoo lay. He looked back at Naruto, who winked. I think I might be seeing you soon, Naruto murmured. No promises though. Now wave. Sasuke nodded respectfully, his face lighting up with a fierce smile, and he waved. The Chunin exams were over. Naruto enjoyed his sleep in the next morning. Almost as soon as the exams had finished, the boy had been whisked away to Konoha's Department of Intelligence. Although it hadn't been played up at the time, the suicide bombing within the Chunin exams had sent alarm bells ringing, and Naruto was forced to spend the next 2 hours recounting his past movements to a squad of very tough-looking interrogators. As much his recent training was classified, it hadn't really been helping his case. Nonetheless, there were some perks to being the Hokage's personal aide, and the third Hokage himself had come down for a brief moment and released him. Then he had left just as quick as he had come, citing an emergency meeting with the fourth Kazekage. Naruto had gone home and crashed down on his bed as soon as he could. He enjoyed his slumber, and arose at 6 in the morning. He quietly dressed and checked the Hokage's master bedroom. The old man had been punctual that day. Naruto would have been quite surprised if Sarutobi had gotten up to his regular antics given the high number of VIPs visiting Konoha, so the blonde Anbu was free to make his way into the kitchen. He paused at the doorway. Sitting at the table, staring blankly down at his food, was Konohamaru. Naruto watched the despondent boy for a few moments, and then deliberately let his feet scuff on the floor as he entered. Konohamaru jerked his head up as Naruto entered, the Jinchuriki ignoring the young Sarutobi as he organized his own breakfast. Then, Naruto took a seat at the table opposite of the boy. "How are you feeling?" Naruto asked quietly. Konohamaru gave half a shrug. "All right," he mumbled. He toyed with his food. "You did well yesterday," Naruto praised. Konohamaru snorted, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. "No, really, you did." "It was stupid," Konohamaru whispered. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "The strategy with the monkey, that was just stupid. No wonder I didn't win. I'm an idiot. I'm good at nothing." Naruto was biting into an apple, and he toyed with it for a few moments. Then, he chucked it at Konohamaru's head. The boy reacted quickly, jerking his head to the side and letting the piece of fruit whiz past, slamming on the sink with a loud thud. Konohamaru turned back to Naruto, an indignant look on his face, but the Anbu was already biting into a second piece of fruit. "For somebody who says they're not good at anything, you've got some pretty good reflexes," Naruto said from around his apple. "And I can't think of many 8-year-olds that could have done what you did at the exams. I wouldn't have been able to." "Please," Konohamaru scoffed, and there was a touch of bitterness in his voice. "You are Uzumaki Naruto. You can do anything. No wonder the old man," he trailed off. "I couldn't have done what you did at your age," Naruto repeated quietly. He put his apple down on the table, and stared intently at Konohamaru. "Take the compliment, you brat." Then, standing, he began to leave the table. He paused at the doorway and spoke without turning. "Besides, it's obvious that the old man favors you the most," he said quietly. Konohamaru jerked at that. "What?" he asked stupidly. "If he didn't, he wouldn't let you enjoy your childhood," Naruto continued. He turned his head, smiling politely. "If he really didn't favor you, you'd have ended up like me. Think about that. But I want to be strong like you." Konohamaru protested, jumping to his feet. "No," Naruto whispered. The sound of rattling chains filled his ears. "You really don't." Naruto spent most of his morning at the office. Despite the Chunin exams, business had continued to run as usual in the village of Konoha. The missions assignments desk continued to pick up clients and send out teams of shinobi. However, without a senior official from the Hokage's office there, a lot of paperwork had built up. Naruto had the clearance needed to sort through a lot of the nonsense, and he did so. As the Chunin around him worked busily, and amidst the chatter and laughter of the clientele, Naruto tuned them all out as he signed through wads of paperwork. He was oblivious to the few stares that came his way, either from the clients or the shinobi he was working with. Sitting in the chair that the Hokage normally took, his legs swinging underneath and barely touching the ground, Naruto would have been happy to keep working in peace. Unfortunately, a shadow passed over his table, blocking his light, and Naruto instinctively looked up. Sarutobi Asuma stared back down at him, his expression stormy, and for a moment Naruto thought that the man was upset with him. His 3 genin trailed behind him, each one looking on curiously, although the blonde girl waved energetically at him. "Was there something you needed?" Naruto spoke up after a while. His voice was decidedly neutral. There was no official bad blood between the two of them, but Naruto's close proximity and working relationship with the third Hokage had had some kind of an impact on Asuma. Coupled with the whispered rumors of the bad blood between the Hokage and his estranged son, Naruto had been careful around the older Jonin, and for the most part, Asuma had avoided him completely. He didn't live in the Hokage's residence, so Naruto never really interacted with the man at any one time. Asuma continued to stare down at him. His eyes were indecipherable, his posture tense and his body language uneasy. "The Chunin exams," he trailed off, scratching at his goatee, a gesture that he had probably picked up from his father. "Were yesterday," Naruto finished for Asuma. He felt a flash of bewilderment. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Asuma snapped irritably, waving off the concern. "No, I wanted to ask you about the intruders, the ones who tried to bomb the arena." "You can ask all you want," Naruto answered, and shuffled a set of papers in front of him. He placed them to the side and glanced back up at the Sarutobi. And I'll give you the same answer I've given everybody else. I didn't know, He snorted. I'd even say that I had nothing against them, you know, if they hadn't tried to blow me up. He had been forced to fall back on the chakra of the nine-tailed demon fox, using the Crimson Shroud as a buffer against the explosions. It had weathered the blunt of the blast, and the coursing, thick chakra had quickly worked with his body to heal any damage that had gotten through. Truly, he could see why the Jinchuriki were weapons and Naruto had barely begun to tap the surface of that particular well. Asuma was nodding thoughtfully, his eyes distant, and Naruto was struck by a sudden "oh." He leaned forward, voice lowering, and asked, "But, you look like you knew who they were." Asuma shook his head with a rueful smile. "I didn't know who they were," he answered honestly. "But the phrase they screamed, it's not the first time I've heard it." Then, shaking his head, he let out a sigh. "Anyway, can I grab a D-rank mission for my team?" Behind him, his genin groaned. The blonde girl, the Yamanaka, rolled her eyes. "Come on, Asuma-sensei," she groaned. "Let's do something more fun." "We'll try something harder when Shikamaru stops sleeping on the job," Asuma retorted. The girl glowered at the after-mentioned boy, who was scratching his head, not even trying to deny the claims. Then she turned on her charm. "Maybe if you gave us something more interesting, Shikamaru wouldn't be so sleepy," she said sweetly. "But if I gave you something more interesting, I'd be showing Shikamaru that all he has to do to get out of work is have a nap." Asuma chuckled and took the scroll that Naruto had offered him. "It's litter collection time, guys. Do it in 30 minutes and maybe you'll think about your request, Ino." The girl immediately grabbed Shikamaru's ear and practically dragged him from the room. The Akamaiki trailed after them, munching from a packet of chips. Asuma sighed, rolling his eyes, and turned back to Naruto. "Can I give you a warning?" he asked frankly. Naruto slowly nodded. "That bombing, the attempt on your life, that was because of your relationship to the Hokage," Asuma said a touch grimly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "That's going to keep happening, I think, and it's probably going to get worse. Do you know something about this?" Naruto responded, leaning in and lowering his voice as well. His suspicions were blaring, and he eyed Asuma with the first sign emotion distrust. "All I know is that the Hokage has made some pretty horrible choices," Asuma said quietly. He moved to pat Naruto on the shoulder, but the boy withdrew, and Asuma sighed. You're going to get caught up in 'em just like I did." Then, Asuma backed away. When Naruto looked up, he was gone, the faint breeze of a successful body flicker brushing against his face. Naruto was frowning as he turned back to the paperwork, but not even the tedious and strangely comforting repetition of the task was enough to clear his head. Despite the rather weird meeting with the estranged Sarutobi, Naruto had gotten a lot of the work done by the time lunchtime rolled around. It wasn't necessarily hard, most of the papers merely needed a signature, but they all had to be reviewed carefully. Naruto had found one scroll that, if he had signed as it had been written, would have sent a squad of Jonin into the heart of the Land of Water. The likely outcome of that mission would have been very unpleasant for those involved, so he had quickly stamped it for further review and sent it on to somebody who knew these things better than he did. Now, he slurped from a cup of instant ramen as he lounged back on a chair in the break room. A group of Chunin chatted to each other in the corner, also on their lunch breaks, but Naruto ignored them as he delved deeper into the riveting material he had in front of him. "What?" he muttered quietly to himself. He flipped the page over, and then grinned at what he read. "Yeah, take that." For the second time that day, a shadow was cast over him, and Naruto rolled his eyes as he looked up from his manga. A white-masked Anbu stood above, a shinobi whose very presence had caused silence to fall all over the room. The Chunin on the other side of the room were quiet, eating their lunch attentively and avoiding any glances in his direction. "Yes?" he asked shortly, none too happy to be pulled away from his reading. He didn't get breaks very often, but when he was scheduled to work in the mission's assignment office and the Hokage was absent, he felt like he could justify it. After all, everybody else did, so why not him? "Hokage-sama has requested your presence in his office, sir," the Anbu said quietly. "Of course he has," Naruto said with a wry smile. He finished slurping down his ramen, and then scrunched the styrofoam up into a ball. He tossed it at the bin nestled underneath the bench, but it missed and bounced onto the floor. "Ah!" Naruto scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. He gave the Anbu a look. "It was my left hand," he defended. Of course, sir. The Anbu was polite, Naruto would give him that, but he spoke with a voice that Naruto didn't immediately recognize. He struggled to place it, or match it with a platoon or squad. After all, in total, there were usually no more than 150 Anbu operatives at any one moment during times of peace. What squad are you from? Naruto asked curiously as he gathered his book and rose to his feet. Gamma Platoon, 2nd Squad, sir, the Anbu responded. He hesitated a little. I've been newly promoted just in from Border Patrol. Oh, Naruto said quietly, scratching the back of his head. Gamma Platoon had suffered extensive casualties during the Blitz, where entire divisions of Skynin had led an invasion force against Konoha using advanced, flying machines. Those numbers would have had to be replaced from somewhere. Naruto gave a reassuring smile to the somewhat nervous Anbu. I'm ready when you are, he said. Thank you, sir, the Anbu member said. The two disappeared in a body flicker, and they raced towards the Hokage's office at a leisurely pace at least, for shinobi, for they were barely a flicker of movement in the eyes of the untrained. As they came closer and closer to the Hokage's office, Naruto felt his Anbu tattoo tingle every few moments, their identification ringing as they entered restricted areas monitored by other shinobi and barrier techniques. If they had been intruders, both would have spontaneously burst into flames right about now. After a few moments, they approached the door to the Hokage's office, which was shut, and around that door stood a large crowd. The two personal guards of each of the visiting Kage stood there, eyeing each other down stiffly. Naruto saw two Anbu standing there, each wearing the white cloak of a captain, and recognized Bird 1 and Boar 1, head of Epsilon and Brave Platoon respectively. They nodded at Naruto and stood away from the door, letting him in, while the newest member of Gamma Platoon hung back as Naruto entered. The door closed quietly behind him. The leader of the villages hidden in rock, leaves, sand and clouds were before him, arguably 4 of the 5 strongest people in the world all in the same room. The atmosphere was tense and heavy, and there was a weight that threatened to push down on him. It wasn't chakra, it was just the strong will of the men in front of him. Naruto masked his emotions as best he could. The third Hokage sat in his chair, the 3 other Kage sitting around his desk facing Naruto. Blank-faced, Naruto walked forward and knelt before the Hokage. Regardless of anything else, the appearance of respect and subservience was necessary when being witnessed by shinobi such as these, and Naruto could afford no disrespect. To all outsiders, Konoha must be united underneath the iron fist of its leader, and there must be no signs of sedition or subversion, even if such behavior had only been intended as a joke. At least, that's what he was told in Anbu. How may I serve, Hokage-sama? Naruto intoned quietly. He remained kneeling. Rise, Sarutobi ordered quietly. The Hokage was shuffling a set of papers in front of him, a pair of glasses on. Naruto was a little confused at that. As far as he knew, Sarutobi had never needed glasses to read. Then, the Hokage had probably never read anything in front of 3 other Kage before. A little misdirection never hurt, he supposed. We've just been going over the results from the Chunin exams, Sarutobi explained. He was puffing on his pipe, something that he had been doing an awful lot lately. The other Kage and I were wondering if we could get your thoughts on how the matches went. You were, of course, the proctor, and as such possibly saw more the strategy and tactics of the genin than any of us. The third Chuchikage snorted. Speak for yourself, you old goat, he grunted. He hovered near the table, using some kind of strange technique to keep himself aloft, and his arms were folded over his chest. I saw everything just fine. Not everybody needs glasses. I too would like to hear the proctor's opinion. The 4th Kazekage cut in with what was probably an attempt to defuse the situation. The 4th Reikage grunted, and just eyed Naruto blankly. The hulking man towered over the rest of the other Kage, his yellowish-white hair combed back. He didn't wear a shirt underneath the ceremonial yellow and white robes of the Reikage, a gleaming golden belt adorning his waist. Naruto didn't like the look the man was giving him, but he hid his emotions well. Yes, Hokage-sama, Naruto said, and he stood there. Who would you like to hear about first? Well, why don't you go through all of the genin and tell us who should and should not become a chunin, the Hokage requested with a rather kind tone. Very well. Naruto thought about it for a few moments. Firstly, I think Kohe of Iwa and Sasuke of Konoha should definitely get the promotion. Both showed advanced combat maneuvers, skill in different areas of the shinobi skill, and the ability to think ahead and implement strategies. They would make good chunin. The Chuchikage looked a little pleased at that. Sarutobi nodded thoughtfully. Very well, he murmured, and ticked something on the piece of paper in front of him. Neji of Konoha might be a possible contender, Naruto said after a few moments. He was frowning slightly, thinking. He has quite a bit of skill, and he was able to recognize when he was in a disadvantageous situation and react accordingly. He surrendered, the fourth Raikage cut in. He leveled a firm look at Naruto, one that the blonde tried to meet without flinching. That's the act of a coward. He didn't surrender, Naruto disagreed mildly. He decided to tactically retreat. The fourth Raikage stared at him for a few moments, and then he threw his head back and let out a bark of laughter. Ha, I like this one, Hokage Dono, he approved. He leveled Naruto a fierce look. He's smart and he's got balls. The Hokage smiled politely. Thank you, Raikage Dono. He looked at Naruto. Thank the nice Raikage, Naruto. Thank you for your compliment, Raikage-sama, Naruto obeyed immediately. It only sent the Raikage into another round of laughter, the huge man slapping his thigh. He was still grinning as he quietened down, revealing a pair of sharp incisors, his small mustache and beard twitching. Nobody else in the room had moved. The fourth Kazekage was unreadable from behind his veil and robe, while the third Chuchikage hovered there with his eyes closed, listening intently. The third Hokage had his elbows on the table and hands folded, watching everything play out carefully. And the rest, Sarutobi said after a few moments, resting his chin on his hand. I feel that neither Gara nor Kankuro showed the qualities necessary for a good Chunin, Naruto said after a few moments. He resisted the urge to sound apologetic for it, but the fourth Kazekage merely sighed and nodded. Sho of Kumo did show some use of strategy, but whether that was enough, he hesitated. That's a question for you, as the Kage, to answer. He finished. I see, Sarutobi murmured. He wrote something else down. Anybody else? Naruto shook his head. No, Hokage-sama, he answered. Then you're dismissed, Sarutobi concluded. He placed his pen down, and shooed Naruto away. Come back in 15 minutes. I need to go over some paperwork with you. Yes, Hokage-sama, Naruto replied. He bowed his head respectfully, and the eyes of four of the most powerful men in the world followed him as he left the room. When Naruto returned, the other Kage had left and Sarutobi had taken off his reading glasses. He was leaning back in his chair, puffing on his pipe as he stared at the faces of his predecessors and, in one case, his successor. Naruto didn't know what he was thinking, but he could tell that the Hokage was in a rather melancholic mood, so he silently walked over to the tea set in the corner and used a slither of fire chakra to boil the water. Then he got about making the Hokage's favorite tea. A few moments later, he carefully balanced the saucer on the cup and brought it over to Sarutobi. He sat it down on the desk, and the Hokage took the cup and tasted it. Naruto, he murmured and then sighed, placing the cup back down. I feel as if, he trailed off, and a rather wistful sigh escaped him. He smiled thinly. It has been a rather exciting half-year, has it not? The Blitz. The cult of Jashin. The Manufactorium. The Chunin exams. Yes, sir, Naruto agreed wholeheartedly. Sarutobi spun around on his chair and eyed Naruto thoughtfully. He took another sip of his tea and then sat it down. You used to call me boss. It was an observation, not a question. Naruto, I think you've become rather boring. Naruto's eyebrows shot up at that. Boring, Hokage-sama, he echoed. What are you, dumb and deaf? Sarutobi shot back. He narrowed his eyes. Boring. Capital B. O. R. I. N. G. It's not a very hard word, Naruto. Naruto's face probably reflected the doubt he felt. He eyed the Hokage strangely. Perhaps you should retire early today, he offered cautiously. Sarutobi made a sudden jerk at that, and for a brief second he stared at Naruto with what seemed like a thunderstruck expression. Then, he threw back his head and let out a rounder heartfelt laughter. It echoed in the office, a sound that Naruto had truly not heard that often. Naruto smiled, not really understanding what was so funny, but happy to see that the Hokage was enjoying himself. A second later, a book punted him in the face and sent him sprawling backwards. What do you mean, retire? The Hokage thundered. He paused, and narrowed his eyes. Did you just call me old? Goddamn it. Naruto cursed between gritted teeth. His nose really hurt, and he held it gingerly, feeling blood. He jumped back to his feet, the spark of indignation flaring up. What the hell was that, you decrepit old bastard? Another book was hurled at him, but Naruto moved his head and it flew past, impacting upon the door with a heavy thud. A small part of him was surprisingly pleased that he had managed to avoid the projectile. The rest was feeling the familiar burden of being the Hokage's punching bag settling back on his shoulders. Only the Chuchikage gets to call me that. Sarutobi roared, leveling an accusing finger at Naruto. And you little shit, are not he. There was a sudden, heavy pause. Wait, what? Naruto was confused. Sarutobi was chuckling again, and he exhaled noisily. Naruto rubbed his face warily, but the Hokage seemed happy enough to sit back down at his desk and return to his pipe and tea. For heaven's sake, will you clean up all of this mess in the office? The Hokage snapped. He spun on his chair, turning to gaze out at the village. And you better not have gotten any blood on my book. Yeah, that would be a tragedy, Naruto muttered under his breath, but quietened as Sarutobi's head spun around sharply to glare at him. He picked up the thick books and placed them back on the shelves, and then began organizing the Hokage's desk. He worked in silence for the next few minutes, Naruto sorting out piles of paperwork into different categories and Sarutobi puffing on his pipe, occasionally stopping to take a sip of his tea. The flavor of tea and tobacco combined must have been strange, but the old man didn't seem to mind. Finally, the Hokage let out a sigh. Things are going to become difficult in the near future, Sarutobi said. He stroked at his goatee, his eyes distant. I say that as a warning of things to come. Be on your guard. Always, Naruto replied firmly. Sarutobi let a ghost of a smile appear on his face. That doesn't mean you need to continue to act, and excuse my language, like a shinobi with a scroll up his ass. Lighten up a little. Naruto cocked his head. What? Something about that seemed just a tad hypocritical to him. Jiraiya and Tsunade both say that you're a little on edge, Sarutobi mentioned. Given recent events, that is completely understandable, but you do yourself and by proxy, the village no favors. He turned. As such, I've put in an order to the Anbu commander. Effective immediately, Anbu operatives Daichi, Yuka, Toa, Komaki and Kage have been placed under the command of Sigma Squad. Sarutobi reached out and patted Naruto on the shoulder. After all, Tsunade was telling me that it's important for children to play with their friends. Remember, I want you home before 10, and stay away from the bad touch. And now the old man was getting all condescending on him. Lovely. Although, the conversation prompted a half-buried memory, one that had only come out yesterday, at the Chunin exams. Actually, Naruto began, I've got a request about Sigma Squadron. Sarutobi puffed on his pipe, and motioned for Naruto to continue. Uchiha Sasuke performed very well during the Chunin exams, and I've had a chance to scout him out a bit. I was actually thinking that he'd fit in very well with Anbu, especially since we need to replenish the ranks. If nobody else wants him, then I was wondering if he could be drafted into Sigma instead. The ceremonial hat had crept lower and lower as Naruto had spoken, until it had covered the Hokage's eyes. At first, the blonde Anbu thought that the Sarutobi was giving him grief again, perhaps feigning sleep, but after a few moments, it became clear that the Hokage was truly thinking about it. Naruto didn't think there was that much to think about, but apparently Sarutobi did. The Hokage drummed his fingers on his desk, and while the expression on his face revealed nothing, Naruto knew the man well enough to see that particular look in his eyes, the look that indicated that the Hokage was truly thinking dark thoughts. Then after a few moments, the Hokage turned to face him, his face serious, and the look was gone. Naruto stared back. There was a beat. What is he, your boyfriend? Fuck you, old man, Naruto shot back. Sarutobi chuckled. I don't think I'm your type, he answered light-heartedly. Mind you, there's nothing wrong with pale, skinny and dark-haired. Oh, just, Naruto shook his head in disgust. Is it a yes or a no? He implored. The Sarutobi hummed. Then, he nodded once. Very well, he intoned. Uchiha Sasuke can be inducted into Anbu, but he's your responsibility. As of tomorrow, he's under your command in Sigma Squad. Do with him what you will. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Naruto said gratefully. Sarutobi waved him away. Now go away, he snapped, but there was a smile tugging on lips. I'm sure there's somebody you want to meet. Naruto began to leave. Oh, and I've sent out the message, but if you see the Uchiha before it arrives, tell him that he also made Chunin. Yes, boss, Naruto answered with a bored tone, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Hiruzen watched Naruto go and all traces of levity left his face. He turned back to the monument, fiddling with his pipe as he puffed on it. Exhaling a loud cloud of smoke, he felt a wry smile crossing his face. Uchiha Sasuke drafted into Sigma Squad, the very same squad that Uchiha Itachi had been drafted into, although it wasn't as if Naruto knew that. Only Hiruzen and a few selected others truly knew how Itachi had answered to the Hokage alone. In the long run, this could pose a problem, however, it wasn't a problem that Hiruzen would have to deal with, and Naruto had looked pathetically imploring as he had asked. Who was he to stop the boy from making a friend? Besides, it would good for the both of them. He was quite content to sit there peacefully, but there was a knock on the door. Enter, Sarutobi called. The Fire Lord walked in, his face unusually serious, and he spent the next few moments shooing away 2 members of the 12 Guardians. They silently obeyed, although the reluctance was very obvious, leaving the Fire Lord alone in the room with the 3rd Hokage. There can only be one. The Fire Lord quoted quietly. Indeed, Hiruzen responded, and the brief moment of respite and levity that Naruto had brought with him was gone. There were very few people who knew that phrase. Weren't they all accounted for? The Fire Lord asked. There was a flush to his pale cheeks, rather unlike the normally composed and silly man. Then again, this was no time for games. I was led to believe so, Hiruzen answered quietly. I have sent out some of my best intelligence gatherers. We will find out what is going on. You had better, the Fire Lord spoke warningly. If this isn't played carefully. He trailed off and shook his head somewhat bitterly. His fan snapped out. He began fanning himself rather rapidly. So many years later, and my father is still giving me a headache. Hiruzen merely sat there, puffing on his pipe. The sins of the past weighed down on his shoulders, but the 3rd Hokage would bear them as usual. He had done so for over 51 years, now. He could continue to do so until it was time. It wasn't too hard to find Hitaki Kakashi. The silver-haired man had booked training ground 21 every day for the past 6 months. Technically, it was probably a little unfair that the Jonin could do so, but one didn't reach Kakashi's level without earning a little bit of respect and earning a few perks. If Kakashi wanted to train on that particular training ground every day, well, the people in admin certainly had no problem. It was there that Naruto found Team 7. Konohamaru and Sakura were sparring, while Sasuke was conducting a series of acrobatic exercises on a nearby trickling stream, exercises designed to stress the chakra circulatory system and increase one's chakra reserves. Naruto appeared behind Kakashi, who had his nose in his little orange book, and he crept up silently behind the man. Just before he could peer over his shoulder, the book snapped shut and Kakashi turned. His face covered, and he wore that perpetual bored expression as usually. Slouching on his feet and looking entirely unfazed, the man smiled from behind his mask, causing his one visible eye to crinkle up. Yo, Naruto, he greeted with a drawl. Captain, Naruto greeted back, and fell in by Kakashi's side. The two watched the genin continue to spar. Sakura was taller, and had longer reach, but Konohamaru was definitely faster and he was using that to his advantage. The blue scarf whipped up and around him, and Naruto smiled with a twinge of pride as Konohamaru used it as bait, dangling in front of Sakura's eyes and blocking her vision. When the girl went for it, Konohamaru dodged, letting the girl overextend herself and capitalizing on it instantly. He's gotten better, Naruto said mildly. I suppose there's nobody better to teach him how to fight dirty. You're more than welcome to teach him boxing if you'd like, Kakashi retorted. He put a finger on his chin. We could have an arena, and a bell, and a sexy girl holding out the cards, and remember, no hitting somebody on the back of the head, that's not nice. Naruto shook his head in bemusement. Civilians, he murmured. What a weird sport. So, what brings the prodigious right hand of God to my humble training ground? Kakashi inquired. He turned a flat eye at Naruto. Has the beauty of my lovely, little girly genin bewitched you? What? No. Naruto denied, rolling his eyes. Seriously, what is it with everybody? Kakashi ignored him and cupped his mouth. Oi, Sakura, he called. The girl in question turned to look at him. Somebody likes you, he said, drawling out the middle word teasingly. The girl looked at Naruto, blushed and quickly darted her eyes away. Naruto scowled, and thumped Kakashi on the arm. The man held the appendage with an expression of hurt on his face, or, at least, as much as an expression as one could have with most their features covered up. Sasuke made Chunin, you jerk, he told the Jonin quietly. Kakashi, rubbing his arm, nodded proudly at that. Good boy, he praised. And he's been drafted, Naruto finished. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. Oh, he uttered quietly. Interesting. Where to? Naruto gave a slight smile. Sigma Squad, under Captain Uzumaki's authority. It's a squad of 7, now. Kakashi stared at him for a moment. Then, he chuckled and patted Naruto on the shoulder. Well, isn't that interesting, he said with a chuckle. When does he start? Tomorrow, training ground 17, at 8. Do you want to talk to him? Kakashi gestured at Sasuke, who was eyeing them from the corner of his eye. When he saw that he had the attention of the two Jonin, he quickly diverted his gaze, redoubling his efforts on his exercises. Naruto shook his head. It might be better if I don't, he said. Can I leave it to you to tell him? Kakashi rubbed the back of his head. I'd tease you and say that I might forget, but this is entirely too funny. Of course not, Captain. Naruto smiled with a touch of viciousness. Damn right I am. Well done, Kakashi said, and then shooed him away, his voice rising. Now off you go. You're disturbing my cute, little bunny wabbits. He deliberately mispronounced the R, and drawled it in that annoying way of his. Oi, Kakashi-sensei were not pets. Konohamaru grumbled as he and Sakura rested underneath a tree. Oh, I apologize, Kakashi said sincerely. He shooed Naruto away again. Now off you go, my large, bloated milking cows. We're not farm animals either. Don't call me bloated. Came a deafening shriek, and the girl was on her feet, thrusting a finger at Kakashi, her face red with anger. Kakashi chuckled. Naruto disappeared in a flicker of movement, allowing the lanky Jonin to continue teasing his genin. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.